Hey, thanks, Jack. We have one of our great friends calling in today, and that is George C. Daughan. George is a scholar. He's got a Ph.D. from Harvard. He studied with Henry Kissinger and has written some great books on the Revolutionary War to the War of 1812. One of them received the Samuel Eliot Morison Award from the Naval Order group I talked to just last week, 2 weeks ago. George, good to have you join us today.
My great pleasure, Ken.
Hey, George, it's Juneteenth, a special holiday commemorating the emancipation of enslaved African Americans, proclaimed in Galveston, Texas, by Major General Gordon Granger, a West Point grad, June 19, 1865. And you've studied the Revolutionary War through the period of 1812. Could slavery have been abolished earlier in American history than it was at the end of the Civil War?
Yes, it could have, but it was a controversial problem right from the beginning. And to show you how difficult it was, two of our greatest people from the Revolutionary War, George Washington and Benjamin Franklin, held opposite views on the subject, directly opposite views. Washington was one of the country's largest slaveholders, and he did not want to free the slaves because he thought that it would result in a huge internal battle where the people who had slaves fought against people who did not have them, and those people who did not have them would be supported by people who simply felt it was wrong to enslave people. Benjamin Franklin felt it was a wrong thing to do to have all these slaves in a country that was fighting for its own freedom and stood for freedom around the world for all people. At the time of the revolution, there were 400,000 black slaves in the United States, and Franklin thought that this was a disgrace, and that these people should be freed. They should be freed in order for the United States itself to cling to its great principles of freedom for all people. Now, Washington didn't agree with that. He thought that the country had to wait to free slaves, because if he tried to do it when he was president, that it would simply cause a civil war in the United States, and that everybody would suffer, and the slaves would not be freed either. And that's really what happened. But Franklin fought very hard to convince him that was the wrong thing to do, that slaves should be freed then in order to prevent a terrible civil war. So this continued on, this debate, until we get to Lincoln's time, and Lincoln, right from the beginning of his education, believed that slavery was wrong, and he got into politics and believed that his principal mission, or one of them, was to free the slaves. And when the country became involved in a civil war over this question, something that Washington had predicted, but Lincoln felt that it had to be solved, because this country, which stood for freedom around the world, could not have all of these people, hundreds of thousands of them, as slaves, and so we had the awful Civil War. And now we are thinking back to this time when we know so much more about all these questions, and we have suffered through so much, we're thinking about talking about Juneteenth. Why do we want to talk about Juneteenth? We want to talk about it so this whole question can be told to our young people as something that we are going to deal with and solve, and have gone actually quite a long way to solving it, because that is what this country stands for. We are a free country, and we have no business enslaving people. Of course, we don't anymore. But we want people to remember what a great struggle and how difficult it was to come to this point. And that's why this day, the Juneteenth, is so important to celebrate, for all of our people to know and realize what in many ways has been a great triumph as we've gone a long way towards solving this problem. But as we all know, we have quite a ways to go still. And having Juneteenth is a big help getting there.
Well,
okay, Ken, that's what I wanted to say.
George, thank you so much for that comment, so important. Tell us a little bit tell our audience about some of the books that you've written, 1812, The Navy's War, Lexington and Concord, a recent book, and what I really like, The Revolution on the Hudson. That book, Revolution on the Hudson, has been recognized as one of the best books ever written on the American Revolution, and I'm very proud of that book. And the sales have been terrific, and continue to be. So I would recommend it. I would recommend that book to people who want to read something that will give them a good understanding of what our Revolutionary War was all about. And it went all the way up, describing incidents at West Point.
Say that again, Ken?
You cover some of the incidents at West Point during the Revolution.
Yes, of course. Absolutely.
And tell us a little bit about, now that's a great one for New York area, because you cover so many areas that were, the battles were fought in. I was thinking of Westchester. My office is on Mamaroneck Avenue, and the British Army marched up Mamaroneck Avenue, landing probably in Mamaroneck Harbor to attack Washington's forces at White Plains. And how much town of Pelham, where Jack and I both come from, was an important delaying action battle just before that, as the British were trying to catch Washington's army in the fall of 1776. Your books really know the layout of the ground of where a lot of people live today.
Yeah, well, the British were in a difficult position at the time, because they had a king who literally didn't know what he was doing, because he was young and inexperienced and poorly educated, and did not understand what he needed to do in order to make a relationship with the American colonies, which were part of the British Empire. How to create a relationship in which everyone in England and Scotland and the rest of the British Isles could get along with people who were very much like them, but had long ago sailed across the Atlantic and established a new country that looked to Britain for its inspiration in many ways, and unfortunately, this young king in Britain didn't understand how to keep all of these people, huge number of people over huge territory in America and England, keep them all together and all committed to a set of principles and ideals which were very attractive, which had to do with freedom and the working together of all these people to get everyone that possibly could the best kind of life to lead and that kind of thing.
Hey, George, tell us a little bit, if you would, about your new book, Lexington and Concord. Really, again, areas we're all familiar with, just outside of Boston, where the American colonial army was able to hold back the British Army, the greatest army of the time.
Lexington and Concord was a battle that the British king initiated because he was very angry with what was happening in the United States. It wasn't the United States then; it was America. We hadn't declared independence yet, and the king was very unhappy with what was going on, particularly in Massachusetts. And
there's a show going on right
what
now.
What he was upset about
it's
was
going to start in a couple of minutes. I'm just going to put you
the
on hold
people
until the show begins.
in America were
No
too
problem.
much interested in talking about freedom and having a bigger voice in the decisions of the British Empire in London.
Yeah.
And one thing led to another, and he decided that he was going to teach the colonies a lesson.
At 3:15?
The lesson being to obey the laws that are given to them by
I think she
the
just
king
called in just now,
and
so I
Parliament
have her on
in
hold right
England,
now.
and not by their own what you'd say mini
Well, so
parliament.
it's going to be somebody else.
George?
in
So-
the States.
George, we're going to have to break, but it is such
Okay.
an honor to have you on the show and
All right,
contribute
I'll
your
put you on
insight.
hold
Great
right now.
comments on Juneteenth.
Right.
And we'll look forward to having you again. And again, your books are just a perfect graduation gift. George C. Daughan, veteran of the U.S. Air Force, Ph.D. from Harvard. Thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure.
You've been listening to CaMMVetsMedia on WVOX AM 4060, heard around the world on WVOX.com. We thank today's special guest, George Daughan, author and historian. And until next week, remember to thank a veteran.